The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Garden District mansion like 1,000 angry fists. 2:47 in the morning. The kind of hour when the world belongs only to those still awake and those already dead. Salvatore Rossi sat motionless in his office chair, a leather throne that cost more than most people's houses, watching 3 monitors glow in the darkness. His office was all mahogany and shadow, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with first editions and crystal decanters, a man's room designed to announce power without speaking a single word. He wore an open black silk shirt despite the November cold, and the scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone caught the blue light of the screens. His fingers, heavy with silver rings, drummed once against the desk. Then stopped. Behind him, Carlo and Gino stood like statues carved from muscle and tailored wool. Both men had been with him for nearly 2 decades. Both had killed without flinching. Both now exchanged a glance that spoke volumes in a single second. On the center monitor, grainy security footage played on a loop. A woman in a black and white maid's uniform moved through the service corridor. 30 years old, maybe, but looking older. Much older. Her face was thin, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to rest. Her name was Cassandra Voss. She had worked in this mansion for 3 years. Salvatore had noticed her the way he noticed everything, which is to say not at all until something made her important. The video jumped to 11:53 p.m. Cassandra emerged from the servants' entrance wearing a worn grey jacket that had been patched at the elbows. Her hands trembled as she clutched a white envelope. A sealed white envelope. The kind that contained papers or photographs or information that people killed for. The footage continued. She moved through the rain-soaked streets of the Garden District with her head down, moving toward St. Charles Avenue. The timestamp clicked forward. Midnight. 12:15. 12:38. By 12:45, she had entered a building Salvatore recognized immediately. The Genovese family's secondary office. A place where business was conducted. Where alliances were made and broken and dissolved forever. 3 weeks, Salvatore said softly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 3 weeks of this. The same envelope. The same building. The same terrified eyes. We can handle it, Carlo said. There was no emotion in his voice, which meant there was every emotion underneath it, carefully buried. Tonight. She walks out that door, we take her. She never comes back. Gino nodded once. The men are ready. Salvatore watched the monitor. Cassandra was walking back now, her empty hands shoved deep into her pockets. No envelope. Whatever had been inside was no longer her problem. Or perhaps it was now everyone's problem. In my world, Salvatore said, betrayal has only one answer. It is the foundation everything is built on. You are loyal or you are dead. There is no third option. There is no space between these two truths. He leaned forward. The leather of his chair creaked beneath him like a bone breaking. A woman who will go to the Genovese family in the dark, who will carry their secrets under her coat, who will do this week after week after week, this woman is not confused. She is not making a mistake. She knows exactly what she is doing. He picked up a remote control with one finger. And I have made my decision about what happens to people who know exactly what they're doing when they betray me. The footage on the screen showed Cassandra approaching the mansion service entrance. She looked over her shoulder twice. Fear radiated from her like heat from a burning building. And Salvatore Rossi, who had not felt pity in 17 years, felt something twist behind his ribs that might have been pity or might have been rage. He could no longer tell the difference. Carlo. Gino, he said quietly. Prepare the interrogation room. She will arrive at her shift at 6 in the morning. She will come through those doors like she always does. And she will not leave. Yes, sir, Carlo said. The 2 men turned to move toward the door. Wait, Salvatore said. They stopped, Turning back. When you bring her in, I want to know her daughter's name. I want to know where the child sleeps at night. I want to know if she has any family, any allies, anything or anyone that matters to her. If she is going to betray me, I want to know exactly what she loves so that she understands the full cost of her treachery. The rain continued its assault on the windows. November in New Orleans was a season of water and decay, the sky pressing down like a fist, the air thick with the smell of cypress and dying things. Of course, sir, Gino said. They left him alone with the monitors. Salvatore watched the footage play on loop again. Cassandra in the corridor, terrified. Cassandra on the street in the rain, shaking. Cassandra entering the Genovese office, her jaw tight, her shoulders hunched, like a person walking to their own execution and accepting it as inevitable. And Salvatore Rossi, who had built an empire on vengeance and violence and the unwavering certainty that everyone was expendable, felt the ground shift beneath him in a way he did not understand. He did not know, as he sat in the darkness 3 hours before dawn, that everything he believed about Cassandra Voss was a lie. He did not know that the envelope she carried contained not secrets for his enemies, but her own savings, every dollar she had hidden away, every penny she had denied herself and her daughter. He did not know that she carried these envelopes to a lawyer's office in the Genovese building, not to share information, but because the Genovese family owned the only affordable legal practice in the neighborhood, and she was trying to fight a court case she could not afford to lose. He did not know any of this. But 3 months earlier, when she had first entered his world, she had taught him something without meaning to. Something that would burn inside him like a fire that cannot be extinguished. "Let me show you," Salvatore said to the empty room, "how a woman I thought was nobody became the one person I could not destroy." He pressed a button on his desk. The monitors went dark. Outside, the November rain fell harder, and somewhere in the city, a woman named Cassandra Voss lay awake in a studio apartment with her 8-year-old daughter sleeping in the only bed, wondering if this would be the night that Derek Collins finally found her, the night that all of her running would finally come to an end. She had $200 in her pocket. She had 12 days before the court case was decided. She had no idea that in a few hours, her entire life would change in ways she could not have imagined, in ways that would hurt before they healed, in ways that would teach her what it meant to be seen. The rain continued. The darkness deepened. And in the Garden District mansion, Salvatore Rossi finally closed his eyes, haunted by a woman's terrified face on a grainy monitor, not yet knowing that the terrified face belonged to the one person who could save him from the man he had become. 3 months earlier, the November rain had not yet begun. The sky was still grey but dry, and in a studio apartment on Dauphine Street in the Bywater district, Cassandra Voss woke at 5 o'clock in the morning to the sound of her daughter's coughing. Emma was 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a rattling cough that had persisted through the entire autumn. The girl lay in the only bed, a twin mattress pushed against the far wall, her small frame curled beneath a quilt that had been washed so many times the pattern had nearly faded away. She coughed again, a wet sound that made Cassandra's chest tighten like a fist. Cassandra did not turn on the lights. She moved through the darkness of the apartment with the careful steps of someone who had learned to navigate by memory alone. The studio was no bigger than a restaurant kitchen, 400 square feet, if that. Her mattress was on the floor in the corner. A hot plate sat on a shelf above the sink. The bathroom was so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms out. She filled a glass with water from the tap and brought it to Emma, whispering so as not to startle her awake. But Emma was already awake, her eyes open and glassy in the pre-dawn darkness. "Mommy, my throat hurts," Emma said, and her voice was so small, so fragile, that Cassandra had to look away. "I know, baby. Drink this. Just small sips." She sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter drink, one hand resting on the girl's burning forehead. Emma's fever had been climbing for 3 days. Cassandra had counted the Tylenol tablets she had left, for remained. After that, she would need more money. After that, she did not know what she would do. She left Emma sleeping and moved to the kitchen area, if you could call it that. A 2-burner stove, a miniature refrigerator, a single cabinet. She opened the refrigerator and looked at what was inside: half a loaf of bread, a stick of butter, 3 eggs, milk that was 2 days from expiring. She had exactly $200 in her pocket. $200 for groceries, for rent, for Emma's medication, for everything else that cost money in a world that demanded payment for air itself. She cracked 2 eggs into a chip bowl and whisked them with a fork. The sound was very loud in the silence of the apartment. She fried them in butter on the hot plate, the smell filling the small space, and suddenly she was not hungry anymore. She had learned not to be hungry. Hunger was a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she made breakfast for Emma. Scrambled eggs, 1 slice of toast, a small glass of milk. She set it on the bed beside her daughter, who pushed herself up onto her elbows, still coughing. "Can you eat something?" Cassandra asked. Emma nodded without enthusiasm. She picked at the eggs like a bird, taking small bites, and Cassandra forced herself to look away so her daughter would not see the desperation in her eyes. At 6:30, she dressed Emma for school in a uniform that had been purchased at a thrift store: grey skirt, white blouse, navy sweater. The uniform was slightly too large, something Cassandra had chosen intentionally so Emma could grow into it. Everything in this life had to last longer than it should. Everything had to stretch further than it was meant to. Cassandra pulled her own hair into a bun and changed into her work clothes, a black and white maid uniform that made her look like a ghost, like a woman who was already dead but had not yet realized it. The fabric was polyester, hot in the summer, cold in the winter. A name tag was safe to pin to her chest. It said Cassandra, but the letters were worn and faded. They took the bus to Emma's school, a small charter school in the Treem district, a place that accepted students on sliding scale tuition because Cassandra could not afford the full price. The bus was crowded at that hour, filled with workers heading to the kitchen districts, the hotels, the mansion-lined neighborhoods where money lived like a god that required constant worship. Cassandra stood and held Emma's hand, feeling the small bones in her daughter's palm, feeling the lightness of her, the fragility of her. At the school, Emma's teacher, Ms. Diaz, was standing in the hallway. She put her hand on Emma's shoulder and smiled at Cassandra, but her eyes held concern. "Has she been to the doctor?" Ms. Diaz asked. "That cough sounds serious." "Yes," Cassandra said, which was not entirely true. She had taken Emma to a free clinic, where a harried nurse practitioner had told her it was probably viral, that Emma should rest and drink fluids, and that it would pass. What it would pass into, the nurse practitioner had not said. "Well, keep an eye on it," Ms. Diaz said. "And Cassandra? If you need any resources, any help getting Emma to a specialist, the school has a fund." Cassandra felt her cheeks burn. A charity fund. A reminder that she was the kind of woman who needed charity, who lived in the margins, who was so visible in her poverty that strangers offered her help without being asked. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will be fine." It was a lie. She would not be fine. But it was the kind of lie women in her position had to tell, the lie that kept them standing upright instead of collapsing onto the floor and screaming. She took the bus to the Garden District then, riding across the city as it woke up, watching the neighborhoods transform from poor to rich, from struggle to ease, from streets with boarded-up windows to streets lined with oak trees and mansions that rose like monuments to a world she would never belong to. The Rossi mansion was one of the largest, a 3-story white plantation house with columns and black shutters and a wrought iron fence that had been polished so many times you could see your reflection in it. Cassandra entered through the service entrance, into a kitchen where the head housekeeper, Mrs. Delacroix, was already barking orders at the other staff. Mrs. Delacroix was 57 and shaped like a cement block, with grey hair pulled back so tightly her face seemed to stretch. She had worked in the mansion for 23 years and had never smiled, not once, in all that time. "Cassandra," she said without looking up. "The marble in the West Wing needs stripping and refinishing. I want it done by noon." "Yes," Cassandra said, and she was already invisible. This was her superpower and her curse, the ability to disappear into the background, to become so unremarkable that people looked through her instead of at her. She gathered her supplies, a mop and bucket and strips of cloth, and made her way to the West Wing. The marble stretched out like a frozen lake, cold and white and completely indifferent to her suffering. She began to work, pushing the mop across the surface in even, methodical strokes. The work was simple and endless. There was no skill required, only time and effort and the willingness to endure. She worked without stopping for 8 hours. Her back ached. Her hands were raw. The skin on her palms had begun to blister, the blisters breaking open and bleeding into the water bucket, turning it faintly pink. At noon, Mrs. Delacroix appeared and inspected the floor, running her shoe across the marble and examining it for imperfections. She did not comment on whether the work was good or bad. She simply said, "The dining room needs polishing," and walked away. Cassandra polished the dining room. She dusted the library. She wiped down the marble staircase with its mahogany banister. At some point during the afternoon, Salvatore Rossi came home. She heard the front door open, heard Carlo and Gino, his lieutenants, voices low and careful, discussing something about a shipment that had not arrived. She kept her head down. She had learned not to look at the rich people who lived in the houses she cleaned. Looking at them was a violation of an unspoken rule, a crossing of a line that existed only in her mind but might as well have been written in stone. At 4 o'clock, her shift ended. She collected her $250 for the week, a wage that had not increased in 3 years, and took the bus back to pick up Emma from school. Her daughter was waiting in the aftercare program, sitting by herself on a plastic chair, her eyes tired. Cassandra knelt down and pulled Emma close, breathing in the smell of her hair, and for a moment, just a moment, everything else fell away. They took the bus home. Emma ate the remaining eggs and toast she had left that morning. Cassandra counted the money she had earned that day and the money she had left, $200 total. Rent was due in 7 days. That rent was $800. She had already paid half of it, but the second half, the remaining $400, was due or she would receive an eviction notice. She went to the kitchen and pulled out a letter that had been pushed under her door 3 days earlier. It was stamped in red letters, "Final Notice." The letter was from Derek Collins, a debt collector, informing her that she owed $22,000 for a medical loan she had taken out 2 years ago to pay for Emma's surgery, a surgery she had needed when a blood clot had formed in her leg, a surgery that had cost $47,000, a surgery that had saved her daughter's life but had also, in a very real sense, stolen her future. The letter informed her that she had 12 days to pay the full amount, or Derek Collins would begin legal proceedings. Cassandra knew what legal proceedings meant. It meant garnishment of wages. It meant liens against property she did not own. It meant a spiral of debt so deep and so dark that she would never climb out of it, not in her lifetime, not in Emma's lifetime either. She folded the letter and placed it under her mattress, beneath a pile of old clothes. Emma was already asleep in the bed, curled on her side, her cough momentarily quiet. Cassandra took a shower in the apartment's one bathroom, standing under water that was barely lukewarm, washing away the dust and marble residue that covered her body. She changed into her second work uniform, a burgundy dress with white trim, and left Emma with Mrs. Chen, the woman who lived in the apartment next door and who watched Emma at night in exchange for $50 a week. The walk to Bella Knot took 20 minutes. The restaurant was in the Marigny neighborhood, tucked into a block of galleries and bars and upscale shops. It was dark inside, intentionally so, lit only by candles that sat in the center of each table, their flames wavering slightly in the air conditioning. The dining room was separated into booths, each booth draped in shadow, the back booths reserved for private conversations. Cassandra worked there 2 nights a week, Thursday and Saturday, and the work was different from the mansion. Here, at least, she was acknowledged. People ordered from her. She existed, briefly, in their vision before she became invisible again. It was a Saturday night. She tied on an apron and began serving. She brought water, took orders, delivered plates that had been prepared by chefs who earned more in an hour than she earned in a month. She cleared plates and refilled glasses and moved through the dining room like a ghost, like a woman who was present but not alive. At 9 o'clock, a woman arrived at the restaurant with 2 men in expensive suits. The woman was Sophie Langford. Cassandra knew who she was immediately, had seen her before at the Rossi mansion, had learned her name from listening to Mrs. Delacroix gossip with the other staff. Sophie was 34, blonde, dressed in a white silk dress that probably cost more than Cassandra's monthly rent. She wore diamonds at her ears and throat and wrists, so many diamonds that she looked like she was wrapped in light. Sophie was seated in a booth in the back, near the private area. Cassandra was assigned to serve her table. She approached with her notepad, keeping her eyes down, her posture submissive. "For glasses of your most expensive champagne," Sophie said without looking at her. "And we need privacy. Tell the owner to clear the booths around us." "Yes," Cassandra said. She delivered the champagne and cleared the surrounding tables, watching as Sophie and her companions leaned close, talking in low voices about investments and property and people Cassandra did not know. Sophie laughed sometimes, a brittle sound like breaking glass, and when she laughed, her eyes were cruel. At the end of the night, when Cassandra brought the check, Sophie did not look at her. She simply placed a credit card on the table and waved her hand dismissively. Cassandra returned with the card, and Sophie signed the receipt without leaving a tip, leaving instead a line drawn through the tip space, as if to say, "You are worth nothing." Cassandra finished her shift at 2:30 in the morning. The restaurant was empty. The candlelight had been extinguished. The city outside was quiet, the streets wet from the rain that had finally begun to fall. She buttoned her coat and stepped out into the darkness. The alley was directly behind the restaurant, a narrow passage between the building and the old brick wall of the next property. She used it sometimes as a shortcut to the street that would take her to the bus stop. She had almost reached the other side when she heard the voices. There were 3 men standing in the shadows, and they were not alone. There was another man with them, someone they were surrounding, someone whose face she could not see. She heard him speak, heard the fear in his voice, heard something else too, a kind of resignation, like a man who had been waiting for this moment and had finally accepted that it had come. "Where's the money?" one of the men said. His accent was thick, New Orleans old money, the accent of someone who expected to be obeyed. "I told you," the other man said. "I don't have it. I can get it by." The first man hit him. The sound was like a hammer striking a wall. The man fell to his knees. Cassandra should have kept walking. She should have run, should have called the police from the bus stop, should have done anything except what she did. But she had spent 8 years working for minimum wage, 8 years being invisible, 8 years being treated like she was not a person but a thing, and something in her had finally broken open. She stepped out of the shadows. "Stop," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough. The 3 men turned to look at her. The man on his knees looked up. Cassandra could see his face now. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing clothes that had been torn and bloodied. His eye was already swelling, already turning purple. And in that moment, before anything else happened, she knew that this man was important, that he was dangerous, that she had just stepped into a situation that would reshape her life in ways she could not yet comprehend. One of the 3 men laughed. "You want some of this too," he said. She stood between them and the man on the ground without thinking about what came next, without considering the cost. And that was when the first punch came. The November rain fell in sheets across the alley behind Bellinot, turning the black asphalt into a mirror of the neon signs bleeding through from the street. The time was 3:04 in the morning. Cassandra had finished her weekend shift 20 minutes earlier, her tips amounting to $12.63, which she had counted 3 times to make sure the diner owner hadn't shorted her again. She was walking toward the bus stop when she heard it, a man screaming for help, the sound cutting through the rain like a blade wrapped in ice. She should have kept walking. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to reach the bus stop, to get home to Emma sleeping in their apartment 6 blocks away. But something in that voice, the raw terror of it, the helplessness, stopped her. Cassandra turned into the alley. 3 men in leather jackets stood under the faint glow of a service light, surrounding a figure on the ground. The man being beaten was thin, homeless by the look of him, his clothes layered and torn, his face already swelling with bruises. One of the 3 attackers had a gun visible at his waist. The other 2 were using their fists, methodical, professional, the kind of beating that came with a purpose. A fourth man stepped from the shadows at the alley's mouth. Derek Collins. Late 30s, expensive gold watch catching the neon, designer jeans, and a smile that belonged on the face of something that ate smaller things. He had been hunting Cassandra for 8 months, ever since the debt collection company assigned him her file. $22,000. A surgery her mother couldn't afford, a signature on papers she didn't understand, a life that had collapsed like a house built from paper. Derek's eyes found Cassandra in the rain. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "look who it is. The woman who owes me $22,000. Cassandra's heart stopped. She calculated in that instant, the distance to the street, the gun, the 3 men, the fact that she had exactly $200 in her pocket and a daughter who depended on her being alive to come home. Every calculation screamed at her to run. Instead, she stepped forward and placed herself between Derek's men and the homeless man on the ground. "Leave him alone," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "He has nothing." Derek laughed. The sound echoed off the wet brick like breaking glass. "You got 200 to your name and you are protecting trash." One of his men grabbed her by the throat and drove her backward against the brick wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She could taste the brick dust mixing with rain on her lips. His hand was enormous, calloused, smelling of cheap cologne and cigarettes. She clawed at his wrist, her fingernails finding nothing but the smooth fabric of his jacket. Another man punched her in the face. The pain was white-hot, consuming, blooming across her left eye socket like a flower opening in fast motion. Her vision blurred. She felt her eye begin to swell almost immediately, the socket filling with fluid, the world on that side beginning to disappear. Derek stepped closer. He wrapped his hand around her throat, his fingers overlapping slightly because he was that much larger than her. He squeezed. The pressure was immense, cutting off blood flow to her brain. Stars began appearing at the edges of her vision. She tried to breathe and couldn't. Her hands flailed, found nothing to grip, nothing to fight. "You got 12 days, Cassandra," Derek whispered, his breath smelling of bourbon and menthol. 12 days to get me $22,000. You understand me? And if you don't have it?" He squeezed harder. The stars multiplied, began to fade. "I come for your daughter. That little girl, Emma. I take her and I don't bring her back. You understand?" Cassandra couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Could only nod, her vision tunneling, her body beginning to go limp. Derek released her. She collapsed to the wet pavement, gasping, her throat on fire, her one good eye streaming with tears and rain. She lay there in the alley, her body aching, her mind screaming, but she did not move away from in front of the homeless man. Even beaten, even terrified, even with Derek's threat against her daughter echoing in her skull, she remained positioned between them. Derek spat onto the pavement. He laughed again, a sound without mercy, and walked away into the rain, his men following. Cassandra lay there for a long time. The homeless man eventually crawled closer to her, whispering, thank you," over and over like a prayer. She didn't respond. She was counting the days until Emma's birthday. 11 days after Derek's deadline, Emma would turn 9. She wondered if her daughter would get to have that birthday. What Cassandra could not see, what the homeless man could not see, was the figure standing in the rain-soaked shadows across the alley street, watching everything unfold like a scene from a film projected onto the brick. Salvatore Rossi stood motionless, water streaming down his face, his cashmere coat worth more than Cassandra's annual salary already soaked through. He was 34 years old but carried the weight of someone much older, someone who had seen too much darkness and had learned to make darkness obey. His face was sharp, sculptured, with a scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of the night when he was 16 years old and watched his father executed by the Genovese family while he hid in a warehouse, powerless to stop it. Salvatore had spent 18 years building an empire on vengeance for that night. Every acquisition, every expansion, every man who knelt before him, all of it was payment for the debt that the Genovese family owed him. Power was the only language that mattered in his world. Power, loyalty, and the absolute certainty that anyone who betrayed you would pay a price that made death look like a mercy. But watching this small, broken woman refuse to let them hurt an innocent man, something shifted in his chest. It was not pity. Salvatore Rossi did not feel pity. It was something else entirely, a recognition of a kind of courage that had nothing to do with strength or weapons or the ability to command armies. It was the courage of someone with nothing left to lose who still chose to stand between evil and innocence anyway. Cassandra struggled to her feet. She was crying now, unable to hold it back anymore, her body racked with sobs that made her ribs ache. She helped the homeless man up, and together they stumbled out of the alley into the rain, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness of New Orleans. Salvatore remained in the shadows for several minutes after they were gone. Then he pulled out his phone. The call connected on the first ring. "Carlo," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I need you and Gino to find out who the woman was. The one in the alley behind Bella Knot. I want everything. Her name, her address, her family, her debts, her dreams. Everything. And I want it in 1 hour." "Yes, boss," Carlo said. "What should we do with the information?" "Nothing," Salvatore said. "Nothing yet. First, I want to know who she is." He hung up and stood in the November rain, water pooling at his feet, his mind already moving through possibilities and contingencies. In 18 years of building his empire, no one had ever surprised him. No one had ever done anything that made him reconsider his fundamental understanding of the world. But this woman had. This invisible woman with her $12 in tips and her daughter waiting at home had somehow made him remember what it felt like to be powerless, and in doing so, had reminded him why he had spent so much time learning to be anything but. The rain fell harder. Salvatore Rossi pulled his coat tighter and walked back toward Bella Knot, where his black SUV was waiting in the employee parking lot, where his driver sat smoking a cigarette, where the rest of the city continued on completely unaware that something had fundamentally changed in the dark heart of New Orleans in the 3 hours after midnight. It is 11:41 p.m. on a November night, and the Mississippi River docks stretch empty and black beneath a sky that has forgotten the sun. The rain falls in sheets, each drop striking the concrete like a tiny accusation. Cassandra Voss stands alone at the edge of the pier, her coat soaked through, her breath coming in ragged clouds that dissolve into the wet darkness. In her trembling hands is a sealed envelope. Inside it is $200. 200. Every penny she has scraped together in the past 6 months, hidden in a safety deposit box in territory that belonged to the Genovese family, the one place Derek Collins would never think to look for her. But he had looked. And he had found. 20 feet away, Derek Collins emerges from the rain like something that should have stayed buried. He is 56 years old, but cruelty has carved deep lines into his face, turning it into a landscape of small, vicious decisions. His suit is tailored and expensive, worth more than Cassandra's monthly rent. 2 men stand beside him, their shoulders broad, their hands resting on the bulges beneath their jackets. The rain does not seem to touch them. It parts around them as if even the sky knows better than to make them uncomfortable. "Time's up, Cassandra," Derek says, his voice like gravel dragged across concrete. $22,000. Right now. She looks down at the envelope in her hands. $200. She can hear Emma's voice in her mind, calling from the apartment 3 blocks away, the apartment with the broken heat and the windows that do not close all the way. Emma is asleep, curled under a blanket that Cassandra bought 2 years ago at a Salvation Army store. Emma is 8 years old and she does not know that her mother is standing on a dock in the rain, contemplating the dark water of the Mississippi River. Cassandra's hand shakes so hard she almost drops the envelope. "I do not have it," she whispers. Derek laughs. The sound cracks across the empty docks like a whip. "You do not have it. Of course you do not have it. You never had it, did you? Not 12 days ago, not when I came to your apartment. Not when I showed you the final notice stamped across that letter. Not ever." The other 2 men move closer. Their footsteps on the wet concrete sound like a countdown. Cassandra's voice fractures like old glass. I can get it. I can work more hours, I can. You can do nothing, Derek interrupts. You are nothing, Cassandra. A single mother, a maid, a waitress, a piece of garbage that my company swept up by accident when your ex-husband took out that loan. Do you know what I think when I look at you? I think about how easy it would be to make you disappear. One step into that water. Your daughter grows up asking what happened to her mother. The darkness of the river seems to deepen. Cassandra can hear it lapping against the pilings beneath the dock, a sound like something breathing, waiting to swallow her whole. She has been invisible for 3 years. She has worked double shifts and counted pennies and gone without eating so Emma could have school supplies. She has survived things that would have broken a normal person. But standing here, looking at the black water and thinking about Emma waking up in the morning to find her gone, something inside Cassandra begins to crack. Not the surface of her, the surface has already cracked 1,000 times. But the deep thing, the thing that keeps her moving forward, the thing that whispers that tomorrow might be better than today. Maybe Sophie Langford was right. Maybe she should just disappear. Her eyes drop to the envelope. The rain is soaking through the paper, turning it translucent. She can almost see what is inside, but not quite. She shifts her grip, trying to keep it dry, and that is when she feels it. The weight has changed. The paper inside feels thicker than it should. Cassandra's hands still. She pulls open the envelope. The $200 are there, yes, but beneath them is something else. A piece of lined notebook paper, folded carefully, the edges worn from being handled. She unfolds it with numb fingers. The handwriting is her own. Written 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a night when Emma had asked her if they were going to be okay, if Mama was scared, if everything was going to fall apart. The words are small and careful. Mama will always fight for you. Cassandra's jaw clenches. Her hand stops shaking. She looks up at Derek Collins. Her voice, when it comes, is steady as stone. No. Derek blinks. For a moment, confusion ripples across his face like water disturbed by a stone. What? No, Cassandra says again. I will not give you this money. I will not disappear. I will not let you destroy my daughter's life because you need to feel powerful. One of Derek's men steps forward. His hand moves toward his jacket. And then the night fractures. Black SUVs appear from nowhere, emerging from the rain like ghosts that have finally decided to become solid. They circle the docks with predatory precision. The headlights cut through the darkness, turning everything into stark, geometric shapes. 12 men in dark suits step out simultaneously, moving with the synchronized grace of people who have practiced violence until it became poetry. Salvatore Rossi steps out of the center vehicle last. The rain parts around him as he walks forward, his cashmere coat, worth more than everything Cassandra owns, hanging loose over his shoulders. His face is stone. His eyes are the color of a storm that has learned to think. Carlo and Gino flank him, their bodies tense, their hands ready. Salvatore stops 5 feet from Derek Collins. When he speaks, his voice is deep and solid like an oath carved into bedrock. Derek Collins. You made a mistake coming into my city and threatening my people. Derek's face goes white. The blood drains from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a mannequin, like something hollow that only looked human from a distance. Your people? She is just some maid. She is under my protection, Salvatore says. His words are quiet, but they fill the entire dock, drowning out the rain. You put your hands on her. You threatened her child. That was your last mistake. The men around Salvatore move like water flowing into a container. There is no violence, not yet, just the promise of it, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Derek's 2 companions realize what is happening. They reach for their weapons. Carlo is faster. He moves like he has already lived this moment 1,000 times, and in 3 seconds, the men are disarmed, their guns clattering to the wet concrete. Gino grabs Derek by the collar. His grip looks gentle, almost compassionate, but when he slams Derek against the shipping container behind him, the impact echoes across the water. Derek's body crumples. He collapses to his knees, his face cracking open like rotted wood. His voice comes out in ragged gasps, each word more desperate than the last. Please, please, I did not know she was yours. I will leave New Orleans. I will disappear. I will never come back, please. Salvatore crouches down beside him. His movement is unhurried, almost gentle. He reaches out and takes Derek's chin in his hand, turning his face upward. The rain streams down both their faces. You will disappear, Salvatore says. Just not the way you want. The signal is silent, invisible, nothing more than the slightest movement of Salvatore's eyes. But it is enough. Gino and another man lift Derek off the ground and carry him toward one of the SUVs. His screaming starts before they have even reached the vehicle. It continues as the door closes. The sound is muffled now, but still audible, rising and falling like a siren that will never be answered. The SUV pulls away into the rain. Derek Collins disappears into the bayou, into the swamps and the darkness, into the place where things that are not supposed to be found go to rest. He will be gone for 3 days before anyone finds a body, and even then, no one will be able to identify it. The official report will say alligators. Natural causes. One of those things that happens in New Orleans, the kind of thing the city swallows without question. Salvatore stands and turns toward Cassandra. The rain has soaked through his shirt. His face is controlled, but something is burning behind his eyes, something raw and terrible and magnificent. He walks toward her, each step deliberate. When he reaches her, he stops. He does not touch her. He simply looks at her, and in that look is the weight of every choice he has made, every person he has hurt, every bargain he has struck with darkness. You are safe now, he says. You and your daughter. No one will ever touch either of you again. Cassandra stands frozen, the envelope still clutched in her hands, the note with her own handwriting visible in the dim light. Behind them, the Mississippi River continues its journey toward the Gulf, indifferent to human suffering, indifferent to grace. Meanwhile, across the city in the Garden District, Sophie Langford is sleeping the sleep of the comfortably cruel, her designer sheets bought with money stolen from people who had nothing. She does not know that, in the morning, her world will begin to collapse. She does not know that Salvatore has been patient, has been watching, has been documenting every transaction, every lie, every cruelty she has inflicted on Cassandra and countless others. She does not know that the phone will ring at dawn, that FBI agents will be arriving at her country club, that her reign of small, poisonous power will end the way it deserved to end, not with violence, but with public exposure, with the systematic destruction of everything she has carefully built. But that is tomorrow's story. Tonight, Salvatore Rossi watches the rain fall on the Mississippi, and for the first time in 18 years, something that might have been hope begins to move in his chest. 3 months had passed since the November rain fell on the Mississippi, and the woman who once cleaned marble floors in shadows had become someone entirely different. Cassandra Voss sat at her desk in the Garden District office tower, her fingers moving across a contract with the precision of someone who had learned to read power. The desk itself was mahogany, worth more than every piece of furniture she had owned in her entire life, but she did not sit back in wonder anymore. She had earned this space. She had claimed it. Her title was now Director of Legitimate Operations for the Rossi family holdings. The irony was not lost on her. She managed warehouses, shipping contracts, real estate acquisitions, the business that moved money cleanly through the city without bloodstains. Salvatore had promoted her not out of charity, but because she understood margins and loyalty in ways that men raised in violence could never quite grasp. She read contracts the way Carlo and Gino read threats. She saw patterns they missed. The office was warm, late afternoon light slanting through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the courtyard where old New Orleans gave way to new money. Cassandra wore a charcoal suit today, tailored and expensive, the kind of fabric that moved like water. Her hair was pulled back carefully. Her shoes clicked against the hardwood when she walked, a sound that meant authority, that meant presence. That meant she was no longer invisible. Emma was in private school now. the Ashford Academy, where the uniforms cost more than Cassandra's entire wardrobe from 2 years ago, where the girls learned French and piano and grew up expecting the world to bend toward them. Emma's cough had vanished entirely. The medication had been expensive, $7,400 for the full course, but the infection was gone, her lungs clear, her small frame finally filling out with the weight of a child who was being fed properly. Every morning, Emma dressed in her Navy uniform and took the car service to school, and she did not ask questions about where the money came from. Children were practical that way. They accepted miracles without demanding explanations. The phone on Cassandra's desk buzzed. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, professional and respectful. "Miss Voss, Carlo and Gino are here for the 3 p.m. meeting. Send them in." The door opened. 2 men in charcoal suits entered, both in their 50s, both carrying the weight of 20 years of service to a man who did not forgive failure. Carlo was broader, his left eye slightly scarred from an incident he never discussed. Gino moved like a dancer, careful and precise, the kind of man who could break your neck and make it look like an accident. They had killed people. Cassandra knew this. She had accepted this. But they treated her now with a respect that had nothing to do with fear. Carlo laid a folder on her desk. "The boss wanted your approval on the shipment routing through mobile. He said if you say it's clean, it moves." Cassandra opened the folder. Her eye scanned the numbers, the legitimate cargo, the port schedules, the insurance documentation. Everything aligned. Everything was legal. This was Salvatore's grand gesture, his pivot toward legitimacy. He was washing his empire clean, one contract at a time, one business at a time. And he had made her the guardian of that transformation. "The routing is sound," she said. "But adjust the insurance carrier for this line. The premium I'm seeing is inflated by 8%. Use Havana Mutual instead, they're more competitive and their claim history is stellar." Gino and Carlo exchanged a look. Not a look of doubt, but of recognition. She was not guessing. She was reading something they could not see. This was why Salvatore had put her here. "Consider it done," Carlo said. "The boss will be pleased." They left quietly. The door closed. The office fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and, in the distance, the sound of the city, horns, voices, the eternal rhythm of New Orleans moving through its day. Cassandra worked until 6 in the evening. She checked 2 more contracts, approved a lease agreement for a warehouse in Algiers, and sent an email to the accounting department requesting clarification on a discrepancy that was probably nothing but might have been everything. Attention to detail was how she had survived poverty. It was how she would survive this. At 6:36 p.m., as she was gathering her things, her assistant knocked and entered holding an envelope of cream-colored paper. Heavy stock. Expensive. The kind of envelope that contained things that mattered. "A courier delivered this 10 minutes ago. Said it was urgent, that you should read it tonight." Cassandra's hands did not shake as she took the envelope. They were steady now. They had been steady for 3 months. She opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was precise, masculine, controlled. That was all. No explanation. No context. Just those words and the implicit weight of a command disguised as an invitation. Cassandra set the envelope on her desk and looked out the window at the city spreading below her. The November sky was darkening, clouds gathering on the horizon. Rain would come. November rain was coming again, just like 3 months ago, just like it came every year in New Orleans like clockwork, like a promise. She went home first to Emma, who was doing homework at the kitchen table of their apartment. The apartment was small but real, 2 bedrooms, actual furniture, a refrigerator full of food that would last more than 3 days. Emma looked up from her math assignment, her small face bright. "Mama, I got a 92 on my spelling test." Cassandra bent and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "That is wonderful, baby. I am so proud of you." Emma returned to her work, unconcerned with where her mother was going. She was 8 years old. She had learned not to ask questions about the men in suits, about the apartment that appeared suddenly, about the life that had been rebuilt without explanation. Children accepted things more easily than adults did. Cassandra showered and changed. She selected her clothes carefully, not a uniform, not a maid's dress, not the desperate woman from the alley. She wore a deep emerald dress that fell to her knees, elegant and understated, something that belonged in a restaurant like Bella Not. She wore a thin gold necklace that Salvatore had given her 2 weeks ago with no ceremony, simply leaving it on her desk in a small velvet box. Her shoes were heels, real heels, Italian leather, the kind that made her taller and steadier. She looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the same woman who had counted $17 in her wallet and tried to decide if she could eat. The shadows under her eyes had faded. Her skin had color. There was something in her expression that had not been there before, not hardness, but certainty. Not anger, but strength. The rain started just as her car pulled up to Bella Not. The restaurant sat on Dauphine Street in the Marigny, old brick and warm light spilling through windows that reflected the wet pavement like dark glass. Cassandra stepped out of the car and felt the November rain on her shoulders. It was cold and clean and nothing like the rain from 3 months ago. This rain was different. She was different. The hostess saw her arrive and nodded without asking her name. The staff had been informed. Everything had been prepared. She was led through the quiet restaurant past tables of wealthy couples and old money families, past the main dining room and toward the back, where the private booths were reserved for men who did not want their business observed. The booth in the back was lit by candlelight. The rain drummed against the window beside it, turning the city beyond into neon and shadow. Salvatore Rossi sat alone, waiting. He wore a suit of charcoal so dark it was almost black, the jacket open, showing a cream-colored shirt beneath. His hair was slightly damp from the rain. There was a scar running from the corner of his left eye toward his cheekbone, something she had never asked him about. When he saw her, he stood, and Cassandra realized that in 3 months of seeing him, she had never seen him stand for her. He had never treated her as anything but the woman he protected from the shadows. This was different. "You came," he said. "You invited me." She slid into the booth across from him. The table between them held a single candle, a bottle of wine he had selected, 2 glasses waiting. "I assume this is not a business meeting." "No." He sat slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "This is not a business meeting." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was patient, like rain waiting to fall, like time waiting to move forward. 3 months ago, he said finally, "I was standing in an alley in the rain, convinced that you had betrayed me. I was ready to—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I was ready to destroy you." "I know," Cassandra said. "Carlo told me." "And yet you did not run." "No." "Why?" Cassandra leaned forward slightly. The candlelight caught in her eyes. "Because I had finally stopped running. I had stopped being afraid. You had shown me that it was possible to stop running, and I was not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I decided that if you were going to kill me, I would face it standing." Salvatore looked at her the way a man might look at something he thought he had lost forever and suddenly found. "When I discovered the truth, that it was Sophie and Derek who had orchestrated everything, that you had been hiding money to save your daughter, something in my chest broke open. I had spent 20 years building an empire on vengeance. My father was murdered when I was 16. I watched him die. I spent 2 decades making sure that no one, ever, would be able to make me powerless the way I was that night." He paused. The waiter appeared silently, poured wine, and disappeared again without a sound. "But you," Salvatore continued, "you had nothing. You were alone. You had lost everything, and still, when those men came for Derek in the alley, you stood between them and a stranger. You protected someone weaker. You had nothing and you chose to give what little you had." "I am not powerful, Salvatore," Cassandra said. "I am just a woman who—" "You stood between armed men and death." That is not weakness. That is the kind of strength that cannot be manufactured or purchased. That is something very few people in this world possess. The rain intensified outside the window. Bella not hummed softly around them, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversations at other tables, the piano player moving gently through a Chopin nocturne that sounded like water falling. "Why did you ask me to come here?" Cassandra asked. Salvatore set down his wine glass carefully. "Because you are not my maid anymore. You are not someone I protect from the shadows. You rebuilt your life. You earned your place through competence and fierce independence. You stand on equal ground now. And I needed you to know," his voice caught slightly, something raw breaking through the controlled exterior. "You taught me that redemption does not come from power or vengeance. It comes from protecting people who have already learned to survive on their own." Cassandra's eyes glistened. She did not look away. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide." Salvatore reached across the table, his hand open. "You owe me nothing. You can walk away and I will make sure that you and Emma are safe for the rest of your lives. No questions, no conditions." Or, he waited, his hand still extended. "You can stay. As my equal. As the woman who reminded me what I was fighting for in the first place." Cassandra looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Outside, the November rain began to slow. The clouds started to break apart. And through the darkness, the first stars appeared, small and distant and impossibly bright. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. She was nobody. Invisible. Powerless. But she saved him long before he ever saved her. Not with strength or money or power, but with the kind of courage that only comes from having everything to lose and choosing to protect someone anyway. If this story reminded you that true strength comes from protecting others even when you have nothing left, drop a like right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that miracles can come from the most unexpected places. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the kind of love that changes everything. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. See you in the next video.